The assistant who sleeps at the worst times and wakes up saving the billionaire CEO. Phoebe Bennett had exactly 3 things going for her that morning. A resume she didn't believe herself, a gray sweater with an ink stain she swore was a pattern, and a teddy bear named Barnaby, who, according to her, had more professional experience than 90% of Chicago's CEOs. And she had exactly one thing against her. She slept. Not on purpose. Not out of laziness. Not because she stayed up late watching television shows. Phoebe Bennett simply blacked out at the worst possible moments, without warning, without mercy, without the slightest consideration for social context. And today, of all days on the calendar, she had a job interview at Meridian Technologies, the most important artificial intelligence company in the city, on the 14th floor of a building that shined so much it looked like it had been polished by angels. She pushed open the double oak doors and stepped into the lobby, dragging a faded purple backpack with band patches sewn crookedly on the side. Her hair was held up with 2 chopsticks from a Japanese restaurant. On her feet, a pair of red Converse sneakers with pen drawings on the soles, and hanging from the backpack, peeking out with the dignity of someone who had seen worse, was Barnaby. A beige teddy bear with one ear sewn with blue thread and a plaid bow tie that he wore with more elegance than anyone else in that building. 7 engineers waited in a room with a dark oak oval table, half in navy blue polo shirts, half in gray shirts, all with the same expression, that of someone who had just heard a strange noise in their car engine and was trying to decide whether to ignore it or call a tow truck. Phoebe stopped in the middle of the room, looked at the 7, looked at Barnaby swinging on the backpack, and smiled. "This is Barnaby. My emergency manager. He never asks for a raise, never complains about the coffee, and has a decision success rate of 100%. Basically because he never decides anything, which, let's face it, is already better than many people in the market. Absolute silence. The kind of silence that has weight, color, and smell." One of the engineers cleared his throat. Another adjusted his glasses. A third looked at the colleague next to him with an expression that clearly said, "Is this actually happening, or am I having a collective hallucination?" Phoebe sat down. The chair scraped on the gray epoxy floor, and the sound echoed like a cry for help that no one answered. The engineer at the head of the table, an older gentleman with round glasses who looked like he hadn't smiled since the previous administration, pushed a tablet in her direction. Phoebe Bennett, present, conscious, and for now, completely awake. She signed the screen so fast the signature looked like a heart monitor in a panic. He started speaking. Neural integration protocols, adaptive processing cascades, synchronization of distributed clusters in multi-level architecture. Phoebe followed along for exactly 7 minutes. 7 glorious minutes of absolute focus. And then the universe pulled the rug out. The engineer's voice began to drift away. The words turned into a warm hum like a ceiling fan on a hot day. The fluorescent light went from white to yellowish in her perception. The air became soft. The world became soft. No, not now. For the love of all that is holy, not during the interview. She bit the inside of her cheek, squeezed her fingers on the edge of the table, crossed her legs, uncrossed them, crossed them again. "Miss Bennett?" The engineer cut through the fog. "Are you following us?" 100%. Her voice came out so loud that the engineer closest to her jumped in his chair. "Total focus. Maximum engagement. You can keep going because I'm standing firm and strong." She looked down. Barnaby hung from the backpack with his plaid bow tie perfectly adjusted, like a general observing the troops before defeat. "Barnaby," she whispered without moving her lips. "Not now, please. If I sleep here, it's the end of my career, which hasn't even started. It will be the shortest career in Chicago's history. Shorter than a sigh. Shorter than." Too late. The weight arrived. That impossible gravity that made her eyelids heavy like vault doors. Her brain shut down the warning system, the shame system, and the self-preservation system, all in the same second. Phoebe finished opening the backpack with the desperate agility of someone pulling a backup parachute, grabbed Barnaby, planted the bear in the center of the oval table between the engineer's tablets and pens, crossed her arms over him, and rested her head. "If I black out," she murmured, her voice already slurred, "register it as a high-level technical break," and fell asleep. Right there, in front of 7 senior engineers, using a beige teddy bear with a bow tie as a pillow, on the main table of Meridian Technologies. The silence that fell over that room could be framed and hung in a museum of universal awkwardness. One engineer opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Did she fall asleep? For real? The one with the red beard who had a pencil eternally balanced behind his ear covered his mouth with his hand to keep from laughing. Another engineer turned to his colleague and gestured with both hands as if he were calling for help in Morse code. And then the side door opened. Julian Vance walked in, a navy blue pinstriped suit, dark brown hair with a side part so precise it looked like it had been done with a ruler and protractor. Greenish-brown eyes that swept over every detail of the room with the speed of a search algorithm. The billionaire CEO of Meridian Technologies, the man who had built one of the most advanced artificial intelligence companies in the country before the age of 32. The man who was now looking at a girl sleeping while hugging a teddy bear at the main table of his laboratory. Julian stopped, looked at Phoebe, looked at Barnaby, looked at the 7 engineers who looked like they had been frozen in time. "Would someone like to explain to me," he said, with the calmness of someone holding a volcano inside, "why there is a candidate using a doll as a pillow in my development room?" The engineer with glasses almost knocked his chair over as he stood up. "Mr. Vance, we were conducting the interview and she simply, out of nowhere." Julian raised his hand. The silence was instant and absolute. He walked to the table. Each step of his brown leather Oxfords echoed like a countdown. He stopped next to Phoebe, tilted his head, and waited. Phoebe stirred, let out a sigh, blinked once, twice, opened her eyes slowly, like someone returning from another dimension and not liking what they found in this one. She saw the paralyzed engineers, saw Julian Vance less than 3 feet away, saw Barnaby under her cheek, crumpled and slightly drooled on. She froze. Barnaby slipped off the table and fell to the floor with the most embarrassing sound a plush toy had ever produced in the history of the textile industry. Her voice came out raspy, half lost. "It happened again, didn't it?" Julian didn't answer. His eyes didn't move. They didn't blink. He analyzed her with that intensity that made everyone in the company feel like an insect under a microscope. Phoebe rubbed her face, chased away the sleep, and looked past Julian at the interactive whiteboard where the engineer had drawn the system diagram. Something lit up in her eyes, as if someone had restarted her processor with triple the original power. "Your latency problem isn't in the central processing," she said, pointing to the board. "You're trying to synchronize all clusters at once, and that creates a bottleneck in the redistribution cascade. It's like trying to get 7 people out of the same door at the same time. If you implement an asynchronous neural cascade with adaptive priority based on the individual load of each node, the system will self-correct in less than 3 milliseconds. The silence changed color, from awkwardness to total shock. The engineer with glasses ran to the board, scribbled formulas, typed on his tablet, and looked at Julian with his face completely bloodless. "Mr. Vance, she's right. This solves the bottleneck the team has been trying to figure out for 5 weeks. Julian kept looking at Phoebe. She bent down, picked Barnaby up from the floor, adjusted his plaid bow tie with a mother's care, and put the bear back in her purple backpack. "Sorry about the nap. I swear I tried to avoid it. It's just that my system restarts at the most inconvenient moments possible." Julian didn't smile. His expression remained impenetrable, controlled, polished like marble. But deep in his greenish-brown eyes something changed. A spark. A glint. Something he would probably deny under torture. He adjusted the lapel of his suit and said, "Phoebe Bennett, you're hired." Phoebe blinked as if she had received a low-voltage shock. "Sorry, what?" "Monday, 8 in the morning. Punctuality is the only religion I practice." He turned around, walked to the door. But before leaving, he stopped, looked over his shoulder and said, "And don't forget your manager." The door closed. Phoebe sat there, motionless, watched by 7 engineers who had just witnessed something that no human resources manual on the planet would know how to categorize. She let out all the air she was holding and looked at the backpack. "Barnaby, we just got hired while sleeping. Is this brilliant or tragic?" The bear didn't answer, but his plaid bow tie seemed to smile. The red-bearded engineer Leo caught up with Phoebe at the elevator. The pencil behind his ear bobbed with every step. "Hey, I'm Leo." "Phoebe, but you already know that, right? Considering I just put on the most embarrassing show this company has ever seen, and it's a technology company, so the bar is high." Leo laughed. "He said no to 14 candidates before you. 14, some with a triple doctorate. None of them made Julian stop in the middle of the room. Is stopping good? With Julian?" It's the rarest thing in the universe. He only stops when he finds something that doesn't fit into the categories he already knows. The elevator doors opened. Phoebe stepped in. Leo held the door. "Welcome to Meridian, Phoebe Bennett." The doors closed, and Phoebe, alone with Barnaby, whispered to the bear, "14, Barnaby." He rejected 14 people and hired the one who drooled on the table. She leaned her head against the elevator wall and laughed. A tired, nervous, and completely happy laugh. Chicago shined through the glass windows as the elevator went down. And up on the 14th floor, Julian Vance stood in front of the whiteboard, looking at the solution that a girl with chopsticks in her hair and a teddy bear had pointed at with her finger. And for the first time in a long time, the 4 black pens on his desk were separated by unequal distances, and he didn't correct it. Before we continue, tell us in the comments, which city are you watching from? And when the story ends, don't forget to give your rating from 0 to 10 for Phoebe and Julian's journey. If anyone asked Phoebe Bennett what it felt like to start a new job at Chicago's most important tech company, she'd describe it like this. Imagine walking into a space lab wearing slippers, carrying a teddy bear, and trying not to touch anything that costs more than your car. Because that was exactly what was happening. It was 3 minutes past 8 in the morning. 3 minutes late. Julian Vance had said, "Punctuality is the only religion I practice," and Phoebe was already entering the lobby like a heretic caught at the cathedral gate. She walked past the giant vertical garden, pressed the elevator button, and grabbed the straps of her purple backpack as if it were a parachute. Barnaby peeked out with the zen impassivity of someone who had already accepted that nothing in this world makes sense. "Barnaby," she whispered as the elevator went up. "Remember the plan? Don't knock anything over. Don't talk too much. Don't sleep. Especially don't sleep. If I feel sleepy, give me a bite." The bear didn't answer. Probably because agreeing to that plan would be an insult to the intelligence of any plush mammal. The elevator opened on the 14th floor. Sector 7, East Wing, was before her like an aquarium of glass and steel with floating screens, test robots, and engineers who looked like they had been manufactured on the same production line. Serious, quiet, and slightly suspicious. Marcus, the supervisor, appeared with his leather-bound tablet, which he held like a medieval shield. A dress shirt with no tie. The expression of someone who had already seen 47 first days of new employees and none of them had ended well. "Phoebe Bennett, your station is over there." Over there was a desk in the corner of the lab, next to an industrial coffee machine that made a noise that sounded like an ambulance on its day off. Phoebe sat down, placed Barnaby on the desk, adjusted the bear's plaid bow tie, opened her laptop, and took a deep breath. "Okay. First day. No disasters, no incidents, pure professionalism." It lasted exactly 14 minutes. At minute 15, Phoebe got up to get coffee. The machine was one of those with 17 buttons, 3 languages, and an interface that seemed to have been designed by someone who hates human beings. She pressed what looked like medium cappuccino, and the machine shot a jet of hot water that directly hit the magnetic keyboard prototype that was drying on the workbench next to it. The keyboard made a noise that keyboards shouldn't make. A spark shot out of the left corner. The display flashed 3 times and went out with the dignity of a hero accepting defeat. $12,000 of prototype. In 19 seconds of the first day, Phoebe froze with the half-full cup of coffee in her hand, looking at the keyboard like someone who had just run over a unicorn. No, this didn't happen. This is a hallucination. I'm still sleeping in the elevator, and none of this is real. Marcus appeared behind her, looked at the keyboard, looked at Phoebe, looked at the coffee, noted something on the tablet with the speed of a professional stenographer. "The TK-40 prototype," he said, in the voice of someone reading a judicial sentence. $12,000. 13 months of development. You've been here for less than 20 minutes. Technically, it was 19, Phoebe murmured, and immediately regretted opening her mouth. Leo, the red-bearded engineer, appeared out of nowhere with his pencil bobbing behind his ear and an expression of someone trying very hard not to laugh. "Anyone want to know?" The previous record for equipment destruction belonged to Doug, back in 2019. He spilled soda on a server and caused 4 hours of downtime, but it took him 2 whole months to do that. He just pulverized his record in minutes. "That's not a compliment, Leo," Marcus said without taking his eyes off his tablet. "I'm not complimenting, I'm documenting." Phoebe sat in her chair and looked at Barnaby. Survival Manual, Entry Number 1, she murmured, pulling a spiral notebook from her purple backpack and writing in shaky handwriting. Technology and nervous hands are incompatible when gravity is against you. 2 hours later, the situation got worse. Phoebe was trying to access Meridian's main AI system to run a diagnostic when the holographic presentation monitor on the wall started flashing. She touched the control panel, trying to adjust the brightness, and the entire monitor made a popping sound, let out a blue spark that made her jump 10 feet backward, and went out with the drama of a movie star in a final scene. Silence in the lab. 7 engineers turned their heads in synchronization, like startled owls. Phoebe looked at the monitor, looked at her own hand, looked at Marcus, who was already noting it down on his tablet before she even opened her mouth. "I swear," she said in the voice of someone testifying, "that I only touched the brightness button. Just the brightness. I didn't even know the thing had other buttons." Leo was in the corner biting his fists to keep from laughing out loud. "That's 2 pieces of equipment in one day," Marcus said, emotionless. "That monitor costs the same as the keyboard, so that's $24,000 on my first day," Phoebe calculated. "That's more than I make in 6 months. I mean, used to make. Because I probably won't survive until lunch." She sat right on the floor, on the lab floor, with Barnaby in her lap. She leaned her head against the leg of the desk and stayed there, looking up. The coffee machine made that ambulance noise. Phoebe turned her face to it. "You're the only one who understands me in this place," she told the machine. "Both of us have trouble functioning under pressure, but at least you deliver coffee in the end. I only deliver destruction." Leo sat next to her on the floor, crossed his legs, and offered a piece of chocolate. "Hey, want to know a secret? If it's that I'm fired, I already suspect it. Remember what I told you in the elevator? About the 14? Julian isn't someone who bets on the safe side. He bets on the different. People who have never broken anything in their lives don't interest him. He wants people who see things that no one else sees." So Julian Vance doesn't hire people because they are safe. He hires them because they see things that no one else sees. Phoebe looked at Leo, then looked at Barnaby, then looked at the burned monitor on the wall. "So I'm seeing things that no one sees? You're destroying things no one would dare to touch." Which, in Julian's head, is probably the same thing. Phoebe laughed. A nervous, exhausted, and strangely comforting laugh. At the end of the afternoon, when the lab was already emptying, she went back to the AI system to finish the diagnostics she had started before the monitor incident. She navigated through the code lines of the main test robot, the one at the center of all the EchoSense research, and stopped. In the middle of the code, buried between hundreds of lines of processing, there was a directive that made no sense. An entire sequence of commands labeled Meridian 7 Directive, Do Not Alter. The same note she had seen on the whiteboard in the interview room. The directive was strange. It simplified the robot's emotional processing in a way that eliminated the very capacity for empathetic response, which was the entire heart of the EchoSense project. Why would someone put a command that sabotaged the AI's main function? Phoebe wrote in her notebook. Survival Manual, Entry Number 2. Someone in this company doesn't want EchoSense to work. She packed Barnaby into her backpack, got up from the floor, and looked at Sector 7 one last time before leaving. Marcus intercepted her at the door. He raised his leather-bound tablet. "Bennett. 2 pieces of equipment destroyed. $24,000. On the first day." He made a calculated pause. "I've seen a lot in this company, but I've never seen anyone with this efficiency for causing material damage." "It's a gift," Phoebe said without thinking, and immediately regretted it for the second time today. Marcus turned his back and walked away, writing on his tablet as he went. Leo waved from afar with the pencil behind his ear. "See you tomorrow, Phoebe. If the equipment survives the night." Phoebe walked through the lobby with the vertical garden, pressed the elevator button, and leaned her forehead against the cold wall while she waited. "Barnaby," she whispered, $24,000 in damage. On the first day. My second day needs to be better, because it can't possibly be worse." But on the 14th floor, after she left, Julian Vance walked into Sector 7. He stopped in front of the burned monitor, looked at Phoebe's desk, where she had accidentally left her notebook open. He read the 2 entries. The first made him let out a sound he would never admit was a laugh. The second, "Someone in this company doesn't want EchoSense to work," made Julian Vance very, very quiet. He pulled out his pocket ruler, measured the spacing of the 4 black pens on his desk, an inch each. Perfect. But his hands were shaking. The Artificial Intelligence Ethics meeting at Meridian Technologies was scheduled for 10 in the morning in a conference room that had more screens than walls and more tension than oxygen. 9 people sat at a U-shaped table, 4 senior engineers, 2 legal representatives. Victoria Sterling, with her scarlet red suit and French twist bun that looked like it had been sculpted by an architect. Marcus with the eternal tablet. And Phoebe in the corner, with Barnaby inside her purple backpack under the table and a spiral notebook open to the page that read Survival Manual, entry number 3. If the meeting lasts more than 40 minutes, the system might restart without warning. Julian Vance stood at the head of the table, projecting graphics about computational ethics, with the posture of someone who was born wearing a navy blue suit and never took it off. Phoebe was paying attention. Truly. Making notes. Circling concepts. Trying to look like the competent professional she was sure existed somewhere inside her, probably hidden behind the same nervous system that made her black out at the worst times. 35 minutes. Everything fine so far. Total focus. No signs of system failure. 40 minutes. The graphics started to get blurry. 43 minutes. Julian's voice turned into a low, warm frequency, like a sound blanket wrapping around her brain and whispering, "Relax. Close your eyes. No one will notice. No, please. Not here." 45 minutes. The fog arrived. Phoebe squeezed her own knees under the table, bit her tongue, breathed hard through her nose, but the impossible gravity was already pulling her eyelids down, and her brain had clearly decided that this meeting had already lasted long enough. She looked at the 9 serious faces around the table, looked down at Barnaby peeking out of the backpack, and whispered, without hope, "Attention. The system is restarting. Estimated return time, undetermined." The engineer sitting next to her turned his head, confused. Leo on the other side of the table covered his mouth with his hand. 2 junior engineers in the corner exchanged looks and held back laughter. Victoria Sterling, arms crossed, raised an eyebrow as if she had just watched someone announce their own funeral. Phoebe pulled Barnaby out of the backpack, hugged the bear against her chest, rested her head on the table, and blacked out. In front of 9 people. In the middle of the ethics meeting, with the teddy bear with the plaid bow tie serving as the official pillow. The silence lasted exactly 4 seconds, which felt like 4 hours. Victoria uncrossed her arms. "Am I seeing this correctly? Is she sleeping?" Marcus noted it down on the tablet without looking up. Sleep incident number 2, ethics meeting. Minute 45. Leo bit his pencil to keep from laughing out loud. Julian stopped speaking, looked at the sleeping Phoebe, looked at the slides on the screen, looked at the 9 people waiting for some epic reaction of corporate fury, and said nothing. He pulled out the chair next to Phoebe, sat down, and waited. The silence became bizarre. Victoria frowned. The engineers exchanged nervous glances. Marcus stopped writing and looked at Julian like someone trying to decipher an equation with no solution. 14 minutes later, Phoebe stirred, raised her head slowly, blinked as if she had crossed time zones, and looked around with that slow confusion of someone returning from another dimension. Saw Julian sitting next to her. Saw 9 pairs of eyes fixed on her. Saw Barnaby squished under her arm. "It happened again," she murmured. "I'm sorry. I really—" "Bennett," Julian cut in, his voice low and precise. "What do you think of the ethical framework we were discussing?" Phoebe blinked, looked at the projected slides. And something happened. Her brain, which had just spent 14 minutes processing information in subconscious mode, lit up like a whole board of lights. "The name of the project is wrong," she said. Astonished silence. "What do you mean wrong?" Victoria leaned forward. "You're calling it artificial emotional processing. But the goal isn't to process emotions artificially. It's to create intelligence that echoes real emotions, that responds with genuine empathy based on human patterns. It's not artificial empathy, it's an empathetic echo. Echo sense." She wrote the name in the air with her finger, as if she were seeing the word shine in front of her. Echo sense. The system doesn't simulate feelings. It captures the emotional echoes of the humans around it and responds with proportional empathetic intelligence. It's like a mirror that doesn't copy, that understands. Julian turned his face in her direction. His greenish-brown eyes were completely still. Victoria dropped her pen on the table with a sharp click. Not out of anger, out of surprise. Leo took the pencil from behind his ear and wrote "Echo Sense" in the corner of his notebook in huge letters with 3 exclamation points. Echo Sense. Julian repeated the word like someone testing the weight of a precious stone. The name is perfect, and the conceptual restructuring you just proposed solves 3 philosophical problems the ethics team has been debating for 4 months. Phoebe didn't know what to say. She still had the mark of Barnaby on her cheek, who was now upside down in her lap. And then the door opened. A man entered without knocking. A gray suit with no personality, a gold watch that screamed price more than style, gray hair combed back with the precision of someone who uses a mirror as a weapon. Elliot Drake, majority investor in Meridian Technologies. He looked around the room like someone walking into a restaurant who'd already decided the food was bad. Julian, I came to see the progress of the ethical AI project that's consuming 35% of the research budget. His gaze swept the table and stopped on Phoebe. On the purple backpack, on the teddy bear, on the mark on her cheek. And this is Phoebe Bennett, Julian said. New member of the development team. Elliot smiled, a smile that had the same temperature as an industrial freezer. This is the girl who fell asleep in the interview, isn't it? The silence gained weight. I heard the story. I thought it was a joke. Elliot walked to the head of the table, occupying the space Julian had just left. You hired a girl who sleeps on the job to work on an ethics project in artificial intelligence. That's fascinating. From the perspective of an investor who pays the bills, of course. Phoebe felt her face burn. Not from shame, from something hotter, something she rarely felt. Anger. The project, Elliot continued, without looking at her, needs measurable results, not pretty names and poetic concepts. The board wants a return, and I want to know when I'll see money coming back. He turned to Julian. Waited for an answer. Julian said nothing. He stood there, looking at Elliot with his greenish-brown eyes completely still. His right hand moved slowly to the desk, found the 4 black pens, and started aligning them, one by one, with precise spacing, without looking down. Phoebe watched his hands, watched the rhythm of the alignment, and understood something that no one else in that room understood. Julian wasn't being cold. He was controlling himself. Elliot left after another 5 minutes of questions that felt like an interrogation. The door closed behind him with a click that echoed like a sentence. The meeting was adjourned. Phoebe packed Barnaby into her backpack, closed her notebook, and walked through the corridors of the 14th floor without speaking to anyone. Her anger had turned into something heavier, disappointment. Julian didn't defend her. Not a word, not a look, nothing. She pressed the elevator button and leaned her forehead against the cold marble wall. And then she heard the footsteps. Julian appeared in the hallway. The strand of hair that fell on his forehead when he got nervous was loose. His hands were in his pockets. His posture was rigid as always, but something in his face had changed. A fine, almost invisible crack in the marble armor. Phoebe. She didn't turn. I should have spoken, he said. His voice came out differently. Without the usual precision, without the perfect calibration. In the room, when Elliot spoke to you like that, I should have answered, and I didn't. Phoebe turned her face slowly. Why didn't you? Julian stood in silence for 3 seconds that felt like an eternity. Because Elliot owns 51% of Meridian's shares, and I own 39, and every time I open my mouth near him, I need to calculate if the word I'm going to say will cost 1% or 10. He looked at her. I'm sorry. You deserved a response, and I didn't give one. The elevator arrived. The doors opened. Phoebe stepped in. Echo Sense, she said before the doors closed. The name is good. The concept is better. And the next time someone humiliates me in a room with 9 people, I'd prefer that the person sitting next to me at least breathes in my direction. The doors closed. Julian stood in the hallway, alone, with the strand of hair on his forehead and his hands in his pockets. When he went back to the room, he sat down, pulled out his pocket ruler, and measured the spacing of the pens. A perfect inch. But the hand holding the ruler was shaking. And for the first time, he didn't try to stop the shaking. He just sat there looking at the perfectly aligned pens, thinking about the girl with chopsticks in her hair who had just taught him that perfection without courage is worth nothing. Julian Vance summoned Phoebe Bennett to a private meeting in his office at 2 in the afternoon on a Wednesday. The email read, Professional Conduct Alignment. Mandatory. Bring notes. Phoebe read the email 3 times, showed it to Barnaby. The teddy bear and the plaid bow tie offered the same advice as always. None. Conduct alignment, she repeated to herself. That's code for, you destroyed $24,000 in equipment and fell asleep in a meeting with the investor, and we need to talk about your life choices. Leo walked past her desk with his pencil behind his ear and a smile that didn't help at all. Good luck. Individual meetings with Julian last an average of 10 minutes. He talks, you listen, he aligns his pens, and you leave. 10 minutes, Phoebe repeated. I can handle 10 minutes. Probably. She walked up a flight of stairs to Julian's office, which was in the northwest corner of the 14th floor. The door was dark oak with a silver plate that read only J. Vance in letters so discreet they almost apologized for existing. She knocked on the door, stepped in. Julian's office was exactly what she had expected, and at the same time the strangest thing she had ever seen. Everything was at perfect angles. The laptop parallel to the edge of the desk, the books on the shelf, organized by height and color. The water glass positioned exactly 90 degrees from the corner of the mousepad, and in the center of the desk, the 4 black pens, aligned with millimeter spacing. Phoebe didn't need to measure to know, an inch between each one. Julian was standing near the window, in his impeccable navy blue suit and his strand of hair in the right place. He gestured toward the chair. Sit. Phoebe sat down, placed her backpack on the floor. Barnaby peeked out from inside, his plaid bow tie hanging to the side as if he had already given up. Phoebe? Julian began, walking slowly to the desk and resting his hands on the edge. In your first 5 days at this company, you've destroyed 2 pieces of equipment, fallen asleep in a meeting with 9 people, including the majority investor, talked to the coffee machine on at least 2 documented occasions, and installed a teddy bear at your workstation as if he were a department colleague. Phoebe opened her mouth to answer. I'm not finished yet. Julian raised a finger. In addition, you renamed our main project, restructured our entire ethical approach, and identified an anomaly in the code that the team of 6 people didn't see in 5 weeks. He paused. So I'm in a complicated situation. Phoebe blinked. Complicated? You're simultaneously the most destructive and the most valuable person who has ever set foot in this lab, and I don't know what to do with that. Phoebe looked at him, then looked at Barnaby, then looked at the empty flip chart in the corner of the office. Can I use the flip chart? Julian frowned. What for? To explain, she was already on her feet before he authorized it. Grabbed the blue marker, opened the white flip chart and started drawing. What came out wasn't a flow chart, it wasn't a graph. It wasn't anything that any corporate conduct manual would recognize as a professional presentation. It was an octopus. A huge octopus with 8 tentacles, each holding a different thing. A coffee cup, a burning keyboard, a teddy bear, a rising graph, an aligned pen, a pillow, binary code, and a sign that read, help. And on top of the octopus, a pair of sunglasses. This, Phoebe said, pointing to the octopus with genuine pride, is the theory of marine multitasking consultancy. The octopus has 8 arms. Some do useful things, others do destructive things. But the octopus works because it uses all of them at the same time. If you cut off the tentacles that make a mess, the ones that do brilliant things stop working too. Julian looked at the octopus with the sunglasses, looked at Phoebe, looked at the octopus again, and made a sound. A sound that started in his diaphragm, rose through his chest, passed through his throat, and came out of his mouth before he could intercept it. A laugh. Short, involuntary, and immediately stifled. That wasn't a laugh, he said, recomposing his expression with the speed of a marksman reloading. It was an involuntary reflex of the facial musculature triggered by an unexpected visual stimulus. It was a laugh, Phoebe said. It wasn't. It was. I saw it. The facial muscles moved. The eyes crinkled. There was an audible sound. Involuntary reflex. Laugh. Julian, I drew an octopus with sunglasses on a corporate flip chart, and you laughed. It's beautiful. It's human. Accept it. He didn't accept it. But he didn't deny it again either. Which, coming from Julian Vance, was basically a declaration of surrender. They stayed there for an hour, a full hour. Julian tried to return to the professional conduct script 4 times, and all 4 times, Phoebe drifted into tangents involving octopuses, conscious coffee makers, and theories about how Sector 7 had a weird energy after 6 in the evening. Julian listened. He didn't agree with anything, naturally. But he listened. When Phoebe finally stood up to leave, it was already 3:15. She grabbed her backpack, adjusted Barnaby's bow tie, and walked to the door. Phoebe, Julian called. She stopped. The octopus with the sunglasses. Don't erase it from the flip chart. She left smiling. In the hallway, Leo and two engineers were standing with expressions of people trying to disguise active surveillance. 10 minutes, Leo said, looking at his watch. Meetings with Julian last 10 minutes. How long was I in there? An hour and 15 minutes. The three engineers looked at each other with an expression Phoebe couldn't classify. Something between shock, respect, and a silent terror that the universe had just changed its rules. She went back to Sector 7, sat at her desk, opened her notebook and wrote, Survival Manual, Entry Number 4. It's possible to make Julian Vance laugh. He will deny it. But it's possible. Almost 6 in the evening. The lab emptied. Phoebe was packing up when she realized she had left her laptop charger upstairs. She went up the stairs. The hallway to Julian's office was quiet. The oak door was ajar. Phoebe was about to push it when she heard a sound. Rapid breathing. Short, gasping, she peeked through the crack. Julian was sitting behind his desk. His hands were shaking. Not a little. Shaking for real, as if someone had turned off the control system he used to keep every muscle in place. He grabbed the 4 black pens, aligned them, measured with his pocket ruler, an inch. Disaligned them. Aligned them again. Measured. Disaligned. Aligned. His breathing was broken. The strand of hair fell on his forehead. His eyes were closed. He was fighting something invisible with the only weapon he knew. Order, precision, control. Phoebe froze in the crack of the door. She understood. Not with her head, with her whole body. Because she knew that feeling. That of fighting your own nervous system when it decides to sabotage you at the worst possible moment. His pens were his Barnaby. She didn't enter. She didn't say anything. She didn't make a sound. She just took Barnaby out of her backpack, placed the bear carefully on the floor, leaning against the door, and walked away. Silently. 15 minutes later, when Julian opened the office door to leave, his eyes went down to the floor. The beige teddy bear with the ears sewn with blue thread and the plaid bow tie was sitting there, leaning against the frame, looking up with the infinite patience of objects that don't judge. Julian picked up Barnaby. Stood there for a time he wouldn't know how to measure even with his pocket ruler. And didn't know where to put him. Because Barnaby didn't align. He didn't fit at any angle. He didn't follow any ruler. He carried the bear inside, placed him on the desk, tried to align him with the pens. Impossible. Tried to position him next to the laptop. Ridiculous. He left Barnaby leaning in the corner of the bookshelf, between a book on algorithms and one on philosophy of mind. And left. And in the elevator, alone, Julian Vance let out a sound that wasn't an involuntary reflex of the facial musculature. It was a smile. The grand launch of EchoSense for investors and Chicago's tech press was scheduled for Friday at 2 in the afternoon. In an auditorium on the 20th floor of Meridian Technologies that had 350 seats, 4 cameras, a stage with lighting worthy of a Broadway theater, and exactly 0 room for error. Phoebe Bennett was backstage, holding onto Barnaby, whom Julian had returned the morning after the bookshelf incident, with a note that read only, unauthorized storage of plush toy in corporate facility. Remove immediately. As if the bear were a life jacket, and she were in the middle of the ocean. Barnaby, she whispered, her voice shaking. There are 350 people out there. 350. I can't speak to 350 people. I can barely speak to one person without causing some kind of property damage or interplanetary embarrassment. Leo appeared with 2 glasses of water, and that smile of someone who knew nothing he said would help, but was going to try anyway. You only need to present 4 slides. 4. Julian does the rest. 4 slides. Okay, 4 slides. I can do this, probably, if I don't black out, Phoebe. What? You're going to rock. Or faint. It's 50-50. Maybe 60-40 for the faint. Victoria Sterling appeared backstage as if she had materialized out of nowhere. Scarlet red suit, perfect French twist bun, gold clasp, heels that made a noise of military precision with each step. She looked at Phoebe, looked at Barnaby, looked at the 4 slides projected on the return monitor. Bennett. Sterling. Did you prepare the ethical restructuring slides? Yes. Reviewed 3 times? 4. Victoria tilted her head slightly, something that could be interpreted as approval or as pity, depending on the angle. Then get up on that stage and show those 350 people what you showed in that ethics meeting, without the nap, preferably. Phoebe swallowed hard. I'll try. Don't try. Do. Victoria turned her back and walked away, her heels echoing like a metronome. And right at the door frame, without turning, she said something Phoebe almost didn't hear. I was once like you. And I learned that the world doesn't forgive those who are different. But that doesn't mean it's right. The door closed before Phoebe could process the sentence. The lights in the auditorium dimmed. Julian opened the presentation with the surgical fluency of someone who had been doing this since they learned to walk. Charts, projections, strategic vision. The audience listened in reverent silence. And then it was Phoebe's turn. Julian turned to the backstage area and nodded. Phoebe took a deep breath, adjusted the chopsticks in her hair, left Barnaby on the backstage counter with a desperate whisper, "Keep an eye out," and walked onto the stage. 350 people. 4 cameras. Lights that turned the stage into a greenhouse of nervousness. She opened her mouth, spoke. The first 2 slides came out fine. Her voice was steady, the EchoSense concept was clear, the data made sense. Slide 3, still steady. Slide 4, almost there, almost. And then she looked at the audience. In the 3rd row, Elliot Drake was sitting with his arms crossed and that industrial freezer smile. Phoebe's stomach plummeted, the words stuck. The fog arrived like a wave, swift and implacable, and the weight on her eyelids tripled in less than 2 seconds. No. Not here, not now, not on stage. For the love of everything, not on stage. But her body didn't obey the desperation. It never did. Phoebe took a step back. Then another. She went down the 3 steps of the stage as if she were retreating from a battlefield with wounded dignity. She sat on the floor, on the auditorium floor, in front of 350 people, 4 cameras, and the company's majority investor. She pulled Barnaby from the backstage area. No one knew how. She moved so fast it seemed like magic. Hugged the bear against her chest and murmured, "If I fall, register it as an intentional dramatic effect," and blacked out. On the floor, hugging the bear, in front of all of Chicago. The murmur in the audience rose like a wave. 350 people trying to understand what they had just witnessed. Journalists exchanging looks. Investors frowning. Julian stepped down from the stage, walked over to Phoebe, and sat next to her on the floor, without saying anything. No expression of panic, without trying to wake her. He just sat, waited. The silence that settled in the auditorium was so deep that you could hear the air conditioning running on the floor below. 11 minutes later, Phoebe stirred, opened her eyes, saw Julian sitting next to her, saw 350 people looking, saw the cameras, saw Barnaby squished under her arm. "It happened again," she murmured. "It did," Julian confirmed, his voice low. "But you still have something to show." Julian helped Phoebe up. She climbed back onto the stage with the bear under her arm, the chopsticks crooked and the mark of the floor on her gray sweater. And she did something no one expected. Instead of going back to the slides, she spoke from the heart. EchoSense isn't a software that simulates emotions. It's a system that listens, that perceives when someone is tired, scared, or alone, and responds with real, empathetic intelligence. Because the best solutions don't come from perfect machines, they come from systems that understand that human beings are imperfect, and that's exactly what makes us brilliant. She pointed to Barnaby under her arm. "I sleep at the worst possible moments. It's humiliating, it's embarrassing, and for some reason science hasn't explained to me yet. When I wake up, I see solutions I didn't see before." EchoSense is the technological version of that. An intelligence that stops, that listens, that processes, and that responds with humanity. Silence. And then from the back of the auditorium, someone clapped. One person, then another, then 10, then 100. 350 people standing and applauding. Backstage, Victoria Sterling watched with arms crossed, and something that could be a smile passed over her face before disappearing behind her impeccable mask. After the applause, Phoebe stepped down from the stage with her legs shaking. Julian came behind. Leo was waiting for her with a glass of water and an expression that said, "I told you you'd rock." And then Elliot Drake appeared, backstage, with his frozen smile and arms crossed behind his back. Impressive theater, Julian. Truly moving. His tone was that of someone shaking hands and sticking a knife in at the same time. But the investors' board doesn't feed on applause. He looked at Phoebe. This girl is a walking legal risk. If she falls asleep in a meeting with real clients, with a contract on the table, Meridian gets sued for negligence. You know that. Julian didn't answer. 60 days, Julian. You have 60 days to prove to me that this EchoSense is worth every penny of the research budget. If in 60 days I don't have concrete numbers, I'm selling my shares to Nexus Corp. And you know what Nexus does with the companies it buys. Elliot left. The silence that remained was of another kind. Heavy, with the smell of a threat. Julian stood still, looking at the door through which Elliot had left. Hands in his pockets, the strand of hair on his forehead. 60 days, he repeated, low. Phoebe looked at him, at the face trying to hide the weight of an entire company on his shoulders. Julian, he turned. 60 days. I need you like I've never needed anyone in this company. A pause. And that scares me. Phoebe stood there, holding Barnaby, with the chopsticks crooked and the sweater marked by the auditorium floor. And for the first time, she didn't know if her racing heart was from fear or something else. She opened her spiral notebook. Wrote with her hand still shaking. Survival manual. Entry number 5. 350 people standing and applauding doesn't erase the embarrassment. But it proves that the embarrassment was never the problem. 2:47 in the morning. Sector 7 of Meridian Technologies was empty, dark, and silent, illuminated only by the bluish light of the monitors that never slept. Phoebe Bennett, on the other hand, slept. She was sitting in her chair with her face resting on the keyboard, the chopsticks hanging from her hair at angles that defied physics, Barnaby squeezed between her elbow and the laptop screen, and her fingers still resting on the keys as if her brain had decided to keep working after her body gave up. The laptop screen showed 322 lines of code that didn't exist before midnight. Julian Vance entered Sector 7 at 2:53. He wasn't there by chance. For 3 weeks, ever since Elliot Drake had set the 60-day deadline, Julian had been spending nights in the lab reviewing data, testing simulations, and trying to find the angle that would turn EchoSense from a promising concept into irrefutable proof of financial return. He turned on the light at his desk, took off his navy blue blazer, and hung it on the chair. Opened his laptop, looked at the corner where Phoebe's station was, and stopped. She was there, sleeping on the keyboard, with the teddy bear serving as a chin support, breathing with the tranquility of someone who has no idea that it's almost 3 in the morning and that there are rules about human operating hours. Julian walked over to her desk, looked at the screen. The code was new. 322 lines written between midnight and the moment she blacked out. He recognized the style, chaotic on the surface, brilliant in logic. Variables with names no one would use in a manual. Empathy echo, heart loop, listen before respond. But which, when you track the execution, formed the most elegant emotional synchronization loop he had ever seen. She had solved the main loop. The bottleneck the whole team had been trying to solve for weeks. The exact point where EchoSense froze when processing multiple simultaneous emotional inputs. Phoebe had rewritten the entire logic and created an empathetic response cascade that worked like a conversation between two humans. Listen, process, respond, adjust. Julian reread the code 3 times. Then he sat in the chair next to her and stayed there, looking at the screen, trying to understand how it was possible for a person to write something like that with their cheek on the keyboard and a teddy bear under their chin. He took his blazer off the chair, walked over to Phoebe, and covered her shoulders with the navy blue fabric, with the care of someone covering something they know to be fragile and precious at the same time. He went back to his chair, kept looking at the code. 20 minutes later, Phoebe stirred, raised her head slowly, her face with keyboard marks, her eyes half closed, and the expression of someone who woke up in the wrong place in space-time. Saw Julian sitting 6 feet away from her. Saw the blazer over her shoulders. Saw the code on the screen. Did it happen again? It did. But this time, Julian pointed to the screen, you solved EchoSense's main loop while sleeping. Phoebe looked at the code as if she didn't recognize it. Then looked at her own hands. Then felt the keyboard marks on her cheek. I wrote this? 322 lines. The most elegant loop I've ever seen in my life. And you did it with your face on the keyboard. Phoebe let out a weak, nervous laugh. My subconscious is a better programmer than I am. Your subconscious is a better programmer than most of the engineers I've ever hired. Silence. The kind of silence that happens when 2 people are alone in a lab at 3 in the morning and the distance between them has shrunk without anyone moving. Julian looked at his hands, then looked at Phoebe. You're the best thing that has happened to this company, he said, and his voice sounded different, without the laser precision, without the perfect calibration. The words came out clumsy, as if he were saying something that hadn't been reviewed by any internal quality control system. And to me, Phoebe froze. Barnaby slipped from her lap and fell to the floor with the sound teddy bears make when the universe decides to get in the way of an important moment. Julian. Wait. He raised his hand. The strand of hair fell on his forehead. His hands went into his pockets and she noticed they were shaking slightly. There's something I've never told anyone in this company, and I'm telling you because you saw something in my office the other day and didn't say anything. And that meant something to me. Phoebe swallowed hard. She knew exactly what he was talking about. Barnaby at the door. The panic attack. The pens. My father founded Meridian. Julian began, and his voice shook on the first syllable. Thomas Vance. Engineer. Visionary. The most brilliant person I've ever known. He believed that artificial intelligence should serve to understand people, not to replace them. He took a deep breath. Elliot Drake was my father's best friend, partner since day one. They built the company together in a garage in Evanston with $400 and a used laptop. When my father got sick, Elliot took care of everything. The meetings, the contracts, the investors. And when my father died, Elliot went to my mother with a contract. He bought 51% of Meridian's shares for the price of an apartment. My mother didn't know what the shares were worth. She was grieving. She signed. The words hung in the air of the empty lab. I was 23 years old. No money, no contacts, nothing but a degree and the coldest anger a human being can carry without exploding. I spent 9 years working to climb up from within the company my father created and his best friend stole. Julian looked at his desk, at the 4 black pens that were at his station, on the other side of the lab. Every pen I align, every object I position, every measurement I make with the ruler. It's so I don't punch the desk. It's so I don't scream. It's so I don't break down in front of everyone like I almost broke down that night in the office. Silence. Phoebe picked Barnaby up from the floor, cleaned his plaid bow tie, and did something the Julian of corporate conduct manuals would never expect. She reached out and took his hand. Julian looked at their joined hands as if he were seeing code that shouldn't compile but did. We're going to get your father's company back, Phoebe said. Her voice wasn't shaking. For the first time, it was steady. I promise. Julian didn't answer with words. He stood there, with his hand inside hers, with the strand of hair on his forehead and his greenish-brown eyes wider than she had ever seen them. Outside, Chicago slept under a layer of urban lights that looked like an inverted constellation. Lake Michigan reflected the moon with the laziness of someone who knows the night is long. And in Sector 7 of Meridian Technologies, at 3:28 in the morning, 2 people were sitting side by side with a beige teddy bear between them and 322 lines of code on the screen. And neither of them knew what was going to happen next. But neither of them wanted the other to let go of their hand. Phoebe looked at Barnaby, whispered, "Survival Manual, entry number 6. Some things are better than sleeping," and she stayed there. Awake, on purpose. Phoebe Bennett woke up on a Tuesday with a decision that would destroy the peace of everyone around. Today, she would be professional. Not professional in the sense of doing the job well, because she already did that between one disaster and another. Professional in the sense of serious corporate adult who doesn't talk to teddy bears, doesn't talk to coffee machines, and doesn't sleep on tables. To ensure her commitment, she established 2 absolute rules for the day. Rule 1, no coffee. Because coffee was the emotional crutch that turned her into a tornado of energy before the inevitable blackout. Rule 2, no Barnaby. The bear would stay home. For the first time since Phoebe could remember, he would stay in bed, leaning against the pillow, resting from what she described as an exhausting career of crisis management. It was 7:57 when she entered the lobby of Meridian. Hair down, no chopsticks. Her sweater replaced by a white dress shirt she found at the bottom of her closet, which had a folding crease that screamed, "I've never been used." Purple backpack, but no bear. Leo saw her walk past Sector 7 and almost dropped his pencil from his ear. "You look different." "I'm professional." "You look scary." "Thank you." That's the goal. At 9 in the morning, Phoebe was sitting in the weekly progress meeting with 8 engineers, Marcus, Victoria, and Julian. No coffee, no Barnaby, no filter. And that was the problem. Because Phoebe Bennett without coffee was like a car without brakes on a downhill slope. And Phoebe Bennett without Barnaby was like a car without brakes, without a steering wheel, and without an airbag. The effect began at minute 20 of the meeting. Marcus was presenting quarterly performance metrics, charts with lines that went up, down, and made curves that looked like a roller coaster designed by someone who doesn't like roller coasters. Phoebe looked at the charts, looked at Marcus, and opened her mouth. "Those metrics measure productivity by hours worked, right?" she said. "Correct," Marcus answered without taking his eyes off his tablet. "So we're measuring how long people spend sitting in a chair, not how much they actually produce. That's not a productivity metric. It's a lower back endurance metric." Silence at the table. Leo covered his mouth with his hand. Two junior engineers looked at each other with their eyebrows on the ceiling. Marcus raised his eyes from the tablet for the first time in the entire meeting. "Bennett, productivity metrics are industry standards." The industry also thought facts was the future of communication. The fact that something is standard doesn't mean it's not ridiculous. Victoria Sterling uncrossed her legs. The gold clip in her hair shined under the fluorescent light. "Are you suggesting we restructure our entire evaluation system based on your personal opinion?" Victoria said with the tone of someone serving a poisoned dish with a smile. "I'm suggesting that if we want to measure empathetic intelligence, which is literally the product we are building, we should stop treating the people who build this product as machines with an expiration date." The room went quiet. Phoebe didn't stop. Without coffee and without Barnaby, the filter between her brain and her mouth had been completely removed, and the words came out like water from a hose with no shutoff valve. "Besides, since we're being honest," she continued, gesturing with both hands, "half of these weekly meetings could be an email. A short email, with bullet points, that we'd read in 3 minutes and go back to work. But no. We sit, turn on the projector, listen to someone talk for 40 minutes about charts everyone has already seen in the report, pretend to pay attention while thinking about lunch, and then leave pretending it was productive. That's not a meeting. It's theater with badges." Leo couldn't help it. His laugh escaped like a hiccup he tried to disguise as a cough, without the slightest success. Two engineers laughed openly. Marcus closed the tablet with a sharp click and looked at Phoebe with an expression that said, "I'm going to note this down and probably use it against you. But secretly, I agree." Victoria squeezed the gold clip in her hair and became very, very quiet. And Julian Vance, who was sitting at the head of the table with the posture of a Greek statue in a wax museum, did something no one in that company had ever witnessed in an official meeting. He laughed. In front of everyone. Not a short, stifled laugh he could call an involuntary reflex of the facial musculature. A real laugh. With sound, with movement of his shoulders, with the strand of hair bobbing on his forehead. The meeting suspended. 8 people stopped breathing. Victoria widened her eyes for a fraction of a second before recomposing her expression. Marcus almost dropped the tablet. Julian realized what he had done, recomposed his expression, cleared his throat. He would align the pens if he had pens there. "Proceed," he said, as if nothing had happened, but it had happened. And everyone saw it. After the meeting, Leo found Phoebe in the hallway. "No coffee and no bear?" "No coffee and no bear. You realize you just called the company meetings badge theater in front of the CEO, the chief operating officer, and the supervisor who notes everything on a tablet, right?" I realized more or less in the middle of the sentence. But by then, it was too late to stop. "Phoebe, you made Julian Vance laugh in an official meeting. That has never happened. Never. There are people who have worked here for 7 years and have never seen that. And tomorrow, I'll probably be fired. So at least it was worth it." But she wasn't fired. At the end of the day, when the 14th floor was already empty, Victoria Sterling appeared at Phoebe's desk, without warning, without an appointment, her red suit like armor. "Let's get a coffee," Victoria said. "I'm not drinking coffee today. It's already 6 in the evening. Your day of caffeine-free martyrdom is over. Let's go." They left the building and went to a cafe on the ground floor of the next block. A narrow place with brick walls and warm lights that made everyone look less tired than they actually were. Victoria ordered a double espresso without sugar. Phoebe ordered a cappuccino with whipped cream and caramel syrup, because if she was going to break her fast, she was going to do it in style. They sat down. Victoria rotated her cup between her fingers for 30 seconds before speaking. "I'm going to tell you something that no one in that company knows. And if you repeat it to anyone, I'll deny it and your credibility is 0 against mine. Understood?" Phoebe swallowed the cappuccino and nodded. 8 years ago, I started at Meridian. I was 22 years old. Unkempt hair, crumpled clothes, ideas that didn't fit in PowerPoint. Thomas Vance, Julian's father, hired me on the first day because I said that artificial intelligence without empathy was just expensive math cosplaying as humanity. Phoebe widened her eyes. I was you. Exactly like you. Chaotic, impulsive, too brilliant to fit in an office chair. And Thomas saw that, just like Julian is seeing it in you now. Victoria took a sip of the espresso, but Thomas died. And Elliot took over. And Elliot doesn't like chaos. He doesn't like the unpredictable. He doesn't like people who sleep on the desk, who talk too much, who don't fit the mold. And I understood that. To survive in there, I needed to change. So you changed. I polished every edge I had. Learned to wear a suit. Learned to speak with measure. Learned to smile without feeling it. Because it was the only way to stay close enough to protect what Thomas built. Phoebe was silent for a while. Then, "Are you telling me this because you want me to do the same?" Victoria looked at her over the cup. "No, I'm telling you this because I did the opposite of what I should have done. I should have fought. I should have been loud. I should have been a nuisance. But I was afraid. And instead of being the person who changes the system, I became the person the system changed." She placed her cup on the table, opened her bag, and pulled out a yellow paper folder from inside. "I tested you, Phoebe. Every provocation of mine, every look, every sharp comment, it was all a test, because I needed to know if you were strong enough. Strong enough for what?" Victoria pushed the folder in her direction. "Strong enough to use this." Phoebe opened the folder. Inside were documents, contracts, share transfer records, internal correspondence, a paper trail that showed point by point how Elliot Drake had manipulated the purchase of the majority shares of Meridian Technologies from Julian Vance's mother, using obscure clauses and emotional pressure during her period of grief. Phoebe read page by page. Her hands were shaking. "This is the proof that Elliot Drake defrauded the acquisition of Meridian. I've been collecting these documents for 2 years. Every contract, every record, every email, all checked by a lawyer I pay out of my own pocket. Why didn't you use it before?" Victoria looked at her with eyes that, for the first time, had no mask. "Because I'm not brave enough. I learned to protect myself so well that I forgot how to fight." Phoebe closed the folder, held it with both hands. "Why me?" Victoria stood up, left the money for the coffee on the table, and before leaving, she said, "Because you're the only person in that company who hasn't learned to be afraid yet." The door to the cafe closed. Phoebe stood there, alone, with the yellow folder in her hands and her cappuccino getting cold. She looked at the folder, looked at the Chicago street darkening outside, and wrote in her notebook, "Survival Manual, entry number 7. Sometimes the person who seems to be your enemy is the only one fighting on your side." Phoebe discovered it on a Sunday. She was sitting on the bed in her apartment with Barnaby in her lap and Victoria's yellow folder open between the pillows, rereading the documents for the 3rd time, when she found an attachment she hadn't seen before. An internal memorandum from Nexus Corp dated 15 days ago, with the stamp "Confidential" in red at the top. The memorandum described the terms of the potential acquisition of Meridian Technologies by Nexus. It detailed the technology, the assets, the team. And in paragraph 4, between financial data and market projections, there was a clause that made Phoebe's blood run cold. The acquisition includes transfer of intellectual property, equipment, licensing contracts, and strategic human resources designated by the seller. HR Resource 001. Phoebe E. Bennett. Lead developer, EchoSense Project. She reread it 3 times. Elliot Drake didn't just want to sell Meridian. He wanted to sell her, as part of the package, as a resource, as a piece of equipment listed between patents and servers. Phoebe sat on the bed for 10 minutes without moving. Barnaby watched her with his usual impassivity, his plaid bow tie slightly crooked. "Barnaby," she whispered. "I'm item HR001. I'm a human resource. Literally." He put my name on a sales contract as if I were a projector. Besides, taking into account my history with projectors, that's almost poetic. She closed the folder, leaned her head against the wall, took a deep breath, and made the hardest decision she had ever made in her life. On Monday morning, Phoebe arrived at Meridian at 7:45, 15 minutes before the schedule. The first time. She went up to the 14th floor with her purple backpack and Barnaby inside. She walked through Sector 7 without looking at Leo, who raised his pencil from his ear as a greeting. Without looking at the coffee machine, which made that ambulance noise as if asking for a good morning. She went straight to Julian's office. The oak door was open. Julian was sitting behind his desk, in his navy blue suit, looking at data on his laptop with the concentration of someone solving an equation that admits no failure. The 4 black pens were aligned. An inch between each one. Phoebe stepped in, closed the door behind her. Julian raised his eyes. "Phoebe, you're early. I need to speak with you." Her tone was different, without the usual humor, without the sarcasm of someone using jokes as a shield, without the nervous warmth that made the words come out in a spiral. Julian closed his laptop. "Sit." Phoebe didn't sit. She stood in the middle of the office, holding her purple backpack with both hands. "I'm resigning." The silence that fell over that office had the weight of an entire building. Julian didn't move. His greenish-brown eyes stared at her as if the words needed a second round of processing to make sense. "What did you say?" "I'm resigning, Julian. To now." "Why?" Phoebe opened her backpack, pulled out a white envelope and extended it in his direction. "Because I need to." "That's not an answer." "It's the answer I have." Julian stood up, rounded the desk, stood in front of her, too close for a professional conversation and too far for what he really wanted to say. "Phoebe, we have 35 days of Elliot's deadline. EchoSense depends on your code. The loop you wrote is the backbone of the entire system. You can't simply—" "I can." She cut him off. Her voice shook for a fraction of a second. "I need to." She extended the envelope again. Julian didn't take it. "Tell me why." Phoebe looked at him. At the strand of hair loose on his forehead. At the eyes that were losing their usual composure. At the hands that, she could see, were fighting the urge to go to the pens. She wanted to tell him. Wanted to show him the memorandum. Wanted to say, "Elliot is selling me as part of the package, and I'm leaving to protect you, not me." But she couldn't. Because if Julian knew Elliot was including employees as resources in the sale, he would confront Elliot directly. And if he did that now, without the organized proof, without the right strategy, Elliot would trigger the sale to Nexus immediately, and everything would be lost. Phoebe needed to leave so that Julian wouldn't do anything rash. "Trust me," she said. "For the first and maybe last time, just trust me." She placed the envelope on the desk. Julian looked at it as if it were something he wasn't permitted to touch. "Barnaby," Phoebe said, and her voice finally cracked. "I need to get—" She turned to get the bear she had left in her backpack, but her right foot caught on the chair leg and Phoebe tripped with the elegance of an airplane making an emergency landing. Barnaby flew from the backpack, crossed the office in an arc, and directly hit the plant pot on Julian's bookshelf. The pot rocked. The plant shook. Barnaby fell headfirst into the pot, with his plaid bow tie sticking out between the leaves like a little flag of surrender. Phoebe lay there on the floor on her knees looking at the teddy bear planted in the fern pot like a work of contemporary art that no one asked for. "That was planned dramatic impact," she murmured. And the joke came out so weak it hurt. She stood up, went to the shelf, looked at Barnaby buried in the pot, and didn't pick him up, because if she did, she wouldn't be able to leave. "Take care of him," Phoebe said, without looking at Julian. "He doesn't like to be alone." And she left. The oak door closed behind her with a click that echoed through the empty hallway. Julian stood still in the middle of the office. The envelope on the desk. Barnaby in the pot. The kind of silence that fills spaces that used to have someone inside. He walked over to the shelf, pulled Barnaby out of the pot carefully, cleaning the dirt off the bow tie, looked at the beige teddy bear with the ear sewn with blue thread, and put him in the desk drawer. The drawer that had nothing inside. The drawer he never opened because there was no reason to have a drawer with no purpose. Now there was. In Sector 7, Leo noticed Phoebe's desk was empty. The laptop, turned off. The purple backpack, absent. The space where Barnaby used to lean against the monitor, empty. The coffee machine made the ambulance noise. But this time it sounded less like an ambulance and more like a farewell siren. Marcus appeared with the leather-bound tablet. Looked at the empty desk, noted something down, then stopped. Closed the tablet, and for the first time in 6 years at the company, he didn't write anything else. Victoria Sterling walked past Sector 7 at 5 in the afternoon. Looked at Phoebe's desk, looked at Sector 7, which seemed to have shrunk 3 shades of color, and said, to no one in particular, she left to protect someone. I recognized the pattern. No one answered. In the elevator, alone, Julian held the envelope with the resignation letter in one hand and the pocket ruler in the other. He measured the spacing of the pens when he went back to his desk. An inch. He opened the drawer. Barnaby looked at him from inside with the infinite patience of objects that ask for no explanation. "Don't look at me like that," Julian said to the bear. Barnaby didn't answer, but his plaid bow tie, even dirty with soil, was still tied more securely than anything in Julian Vance's life. The cafe was called the Rusty Compass. It was on a corner of Lincoln Park, Chicago, with exposed brick walls, peeling wooden tables, and a bell on the door that rang every time someone entered or left, which on a busy day meant the bell basically didn't stop sounding. Phoebe Bennett had been working there for 2 weeks. She wore a black apron, served cappuccinos to tourists and espressos to rushed executives, and lived in an apartment so small that if she sneezed in the kitchen, she felt the echo in the bathroom. Her boss was named Brett, a man 50-something years old who wore an orange bow tie on even days, a tweed vest on odd days, and round glasses so huge they occupied 60% of his facial surface. Brett spoke in corporate terms to describe absolutely everything, including coffee preparation. "Phoebe, the throughput of cappuccinos is below the benchmark of Q3. We need to optimize the foam workflow to ensure delivery within the SLA of 3 minutes per order. Brett, it's a cafe. We just need to put hot milk in the cup." Synergy, Phoebe. Synergy between milk and steam. It's all a matter of alignment. Phoebe looked at Brett and thought that if the gods of the universe had a sense of humor, they had definitely placed a guy who said alignment without irony in the path of a girl who had just fled from a CEO obsessed with pen alignment. At the corner table, leaning against an empty cup, was Bear 2.0. Bear 2.0 wasn't Barnaby. It wasn't close to being Barnaby. It was a dark brown bear bought at the corner convenience store for $12.99, with the price tag still hanging from its ear because Phoebe hadn't had the courage to take it off. Taking off the tag meant accepting that he was permanent, and accepting that he was permanent meant accepting that Barnaby wasn't coming back. Bear 2.0 didn't have a bow tie. It didn't have an ear sewn with blue thread. It didn't have the silent, impenetrable dignity of one who had survived board meetings, panic attacks from billionaire CEOs, and uncontrolled flights into plant pots. He was just a shelf bear. And Phoebe knew that. "You're a mediocre replacement," she said to the bear while cleaning the counter. "No offense, but it's like exchanging a diamond for bottle glass." Brett appeared behind her. "Are you talking to the bear again?" "He's my brain optimization device. Phoebe. It's a Japanese concept. It's called ikigai. Talking to inanimate objects as a practice of corporate mindfulness. That's not real. You don't know. You wear an orange bow tie." Brett opened his mouth, closed it, adjusted his tie, and left murmuring something about millennials and professional boundaries. At 4 in the afternoon, the cafe emptied. Chicago's autumn rain began to fall, first thin, then heavy, then with the personal intensity of someone who has a message to deliver. Phoebe sat at the corner table next to Bear 2.0 and opened her laptop. Brett's inventory control app was freezing. A bug in the ingredient calculation system that caused the spreadsheet to multiply the amount of milk by 1,000 every time someone registered an order for a latte with almond milk. 432 liters of almond milk, Phoebe read on the screen. For a cafe that sells 12 cappuccinos a day, seems legitimate. She tried to solve it, looked at the code, adjusted variables, tried different approaches. She couldn't, and then she felt something familiar, a pressure, a temptation, an internal voice that said, "Close your eyes, let the system restart. When you come back, the solution will be there." She looked at Bear 2.0, hugged the dark brown bear against her chest, closed her eyes, breathe, relax, let it come. 1 minute. 2 minutes. Nothing. 3 minutes. Her body refused. Her brain wouldn't shut down. The fog didn't come. The impossible gravity that pulled her eyelids down every other time was absent, like a visitor who decided not to show up right when they were invited. Phoebe opened her eyes. "It's not going to happen," she whispered. It's not. For the first time in her life, the blackout didn't come when she needed it. The mechanism that had always worked, without warning, without control, without permission, simply refused to appear when called. She looked at Bear 2.0 with the price tag hanging. She looked at the screen with the 432 liters of almond milk and thought of Julian's voice that night in Sector 7 when he saw the code she had written while sleeping. "Your subconscious is a better programmer than most of the engineers I've ever hired." And another voice, more recent. One she didn't know where it came from. Maybe from herself. Maybe I don't need to sleep to be brilliant. Phoebe looked at the code with open eyes, wide open, awake, present, and saw it. The bug wasn't in the multiplication calculation. It was in the unit variable. The system was registering milliliters as liters, a scale conversion error that made 12 cappuccinos look like an order to feed an elephant seal. She corrected it in 7 lines of code. No blackout, no sleep, no restart. With open eyes, Phoebe stood looking at the screen with the correction working, then looked at her own hands, then at Bear 2.0. I did it, she said. I solved it, awake, without sleeping, no tricks, nothing. She laughed, a short, half-wet, half-relieved laugh that came from a place inside her that probably needed remodeling for a long time. Maybe I'm not a bug, Bear 2.0. Maybe I'm a system that works in 2 ways, and both are valid. The rain continued to fall over Chicago with the insistence of someone who doesn't intend to stop anytime soon. At 6 in the evening, a taxi stopped in front of the Rusty Compass. Inside the taxi, Julian Vance held a beige teddy bear with an ear sewn with blue thread and a clean, adjusted plaid bow tie. He looked at the cafe door through the rain-blurred window, hesitated, opened the taxi door, stepped out into the rain. At the same moment, Phoebe was taking off her apron. The shift was over. She grabbed Bear 2.0, her purple backpack, and left through the back door toward the bus stop. Julian entered through the front door. The bell rang. The cafe was almost empty. Brett appeared behind the counter, adjusted his round glasses, and looked at the man in the rain-soaked navy blue suit holding a teddy bear. Good evening. Cappuccino? Julian looked around. Corner table empty, apron hanging, no purple backpack. There was a girl working here, Julian said. Chopsticks in her hair. Gray sweater. Talks to bears. Brett tilted his head. Phoebe? She just left. About 3 minutes ago. Julian looked at the back door, then at Barnaby in his arms, then at the rain falling like a movie curtain outside. Thank you, he said, and left. In the taxi back, Julian placed Barnaby on the seat next to him. The bear fell to the side, his bow tie touching the seatbelt as if he had decided to get comfortable for the trip. Don't look at me like that, Julian said to the bear. Barnaby didn't look. Barnaby never looked. But Julian could swear the bow tie was crooked on purpose, just to tease him. He leaned his head against the cold glass of the taxi. Chicago passed by outside, wet and shining, the lights of the buildings blurred by the rain like moving watercolor. I should have been faster, he murmured. On the bus on the other side of the city, Phoebe leaned her forehead against the wet glass. Bear 2.0 was in her lap, with the price tag swinging. She thought of Julian. Of the blazer he placed on her shoulders, of the hands that shook near the pens, of his voice, saying, "And to me," and wrote in her notebook, her handwriting shaky from the bus's sway. Survival Manual, entry number 8. The hardest thing in the world isn't sleeping at the wrong moment. It's staying awake when everything inside you tells you to close your eyes and give up. The grand press conference of Meridian Technologies was scheduled for Wednesday at noon at McCormick Place, Chicago's largest convention center. 400 journalists, 80 investors, 12 cameras. A stage with lighting that cost more than Phoebe's apartment. And in the center of the stage, the EchoSense robot, a prototype with a brushed aluminum frame, blue digital eyes, and an emotional processing capability that was, in the marketing team's words, the greatest revolution in empathetic artificial intelligence since the invention of the smile. Victoria Sterling was backstage. Scarlet red suit, French twist bun, expression of a general before the battle. She was the one who was going to present. Without Phoebe. Without the original code. Without the girl who fell asleep at the desk and woke up solving the impossible. Because Phoebe had been gone for 18 days. Julian entered backstage in his navy blue suit and an expression that could be classified as determination, worry, or contained desperation, depending on which angle you looked from. Is the system ready? He asked. The system is functional, Victoria replied, and her choice of the word functional instead of ready didn't go unnoticed. Functional is different from ready. It's what we have. Phoebe's code is in there, but Elliot ordered his team to simplify the main loop last week, said the original processing was excessively complex for a public demonstration. Julian stopped. Elliot meddled with the code? Elliot ordered it done. An external team, without consulting engineering, without consulting me. I found out last night when I ran the final diagnostic. Julian closed his eyes for a second. His hands went into his pockets. His fingers searched for his pocket ruler and didn't find it. He had left it on his office desk. How much of the original code was changed? The asynchronous neural cascade Phoebe wrote was replaced by a simplified version. Less processing, less nuance, less empathy. So the system is going to crash, under real load, with 400 people asking questions live? Victoria looked at him over the reading glasses she only wore when no one was looking. Yes, it's going to crash. The stage lights went on, the journalists settled in, the cameras turned on. Victoria walked onto the stage with the confidence of someone who had faced worse things than 400 journalists and began the presentation. The first 10 minutes were flawless. Slides, data, market projections. Victoria was good at this, the best perhaps. Every word calibrated, every pause calculated, every smile measured to the millimeter. And then it was time for the live demonstration. The robot was activated. The digital eyes lit up in blue. The audience leaned forward. Victoria asked the robot the first question. Echo sense. How would you describe the emotional state of this room right now? The robot processed, the eyes blinked, and replied, I detect moderate anxiety. 42% expectation, 28% skepticism, 15% genuine curiosity. Applause. Impressed murmurs. A journalist in the first row took notes frantically. Second question. How would you respond to someone who is feeling lonely? The robot processed. Slower this time. The eyes blinked twice. I'm detecting. Processing emotional input. Please wait. The audience waited. Victoria waited. Julian backstage clenched his hands. Error, the robot said. Processing cascade interrupted. Emotional loop not found. Error. The murmur in the audience changed tone. Victoria tried to reconnect. Echo sense. The question was about loneliness. How would you describe the feeling of error? Error. Feeling unidentified. Meridian 7 directive active. Simplified emotional processing. Standard response. Feeling is unsupported variable. Silence. 400 journalists stopped writing. 80 investors looked at each other. 12 cameras continued filming with the indifference of machines. The robot stood in the center of the stage with its blue eyes flashing in an error pattern that looked like a Morse code declaration of incompetence. Error. 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 Feeling unidentified. Feeling unsupported. Error. Victoria pressed the buttons on the control panel. Nothing. The robot kept repeating error with the monotonous, pathetic voice of a calculator trying to divide by zero. Backstage, Julian watched with a white face. Marcus held the leather-bound tablet without noting anything down. Leo had both hands on his head. Meridian 7 directive. Leo repeated, looking at Julian. That was Elliot. He sabotaged the code. He simplified it, Julian corrected, his voice tight, which is the polite way of saying he ripped the heart out of the system and expects it to work without it. Elliot Drake was sitting in the third row, arms crossed, with the smile of someone who had just won a chess game they played against themselves. The journalists began raising their hands. The questions came in bursts. Was the system launched prematurely? Is there an engineering failure in the project? Does Meridian have a quality control problem? And then Victoria Sterling did something no one expected. Instead of trying to reconnect the robot, instead of doing damage control, instead of smiling and deflecting as she would on any other day of her polished, flawless professional life, she dropped the remote control on the floor, walked to the center microphone, and spoke. Ladies and gentlemen, what you have just seen is not an engineering failure. EchoSense was designed to function with a complete emotional processing neural cascade. That cascade was created by a brilliant developer who isn't here today. Last week, without consulting the engineering team, without consulting me, and without consulting the CEO of this company, the original code was replaced by a simplified version by order of the majority shareholder. The murmur turned into an earthquake. What you saw is not incompetence, Victoria continued, her voice steady and clear as steel. It's sabotage. The code was changed to facilitate an accelerated sale of the company, and the person responsible is sitting in the third row. 400 heads turned in the direction of Elliot Drake. Elliot stood up. The smile was gone. In its place, an expression that could freeze all of Lake Michigan. Victoria, you are making very serious accusations on a public platform with 12 active cameras. I hope you have proof to support every word. Victoria looked at him and smiled. For the first time in 8 years, a smile that was real. I do. Elliot left the auditorium without looking back. His assistants ran after him like lost ducklings. The journalists exploded, cross-questions, turning cameras, phones filming. Julian went onto the stage and took the microphone with the composure of someone holding a fire with bare hands. Meridian Technologies will issue a full statement within the next 24 hours. The EchoSense project is real. It is functional, and it will be relaunched with the original code restored. Thank you for your patience. He stepped down from the stage, met Victoria backstage. You just exposed the company's majority investor in front of 400 journalists and 12 cameras. I know, without warning me. If I warned you, you'd try to stop me. I would. That's why I didn't tell you. Julian looked at her for a long moment. Thank you. Victoria adjusted the gold clip in her hair, which had survived everything without moving a millimeter. Don't thank me. Call her. Call whom? Victoria gave a look that said, Are you really going to make me say the name? Call Phoebe, Julian. Now. Before this story occupies every news channel in Chicago and she thinks the company she helped build has gone down the drain. Julian grabbed his cell phone, looked at the screen, looked at the leather bag where Barnaby had been since he left the office that morning. Marcus appeared next to him, closed the leather-bound tablet with a definitive click. We need Phoebe, Marcus said, and it was the first time the supervisor said her name without noting an incident on the tablet. The company needs her. The project needs her. And if I may be direct, you need her. Julian squeezed Barnaby inside the leather bag and dialed. Phoebe saw everything on the television at the Rusty Compass. The press conference, the robot crashing, Victoria on the microphone, Elliot leaving in a fury, Julian trying to hold back the chaos. Brett was next to her behind the counter, in his round glasses and tweed vest, holding a dish towel as if it were an amulet. Isn't that the company where you used to work? Phoebe didn't answer. She was looking at the screen with the expression of someone who had just heard the fire alarm in the building she thought she had abandoned. Her cell phone rang. A number from Meridian. She answered, Phoebe, Julian's voice, without the perfect calibration, without the measured cadence, just his voice, raw and cracked. I need you. 3 seconds of silence that felt like 3 centuries. Where? She said. McCormick Place. The journalists are still here. The system crashed. Elliot's code destroyed the cascade. Only you know how to rebuild it. Phoebe looked at Brett. I need to go. You're in the middle of a shift. Brett, the company I used to work for is collapsing live on national television. The artificial intelligence I helped build is repeating error on stage. And the CEO just called me asking for help. Brett blinked behind his huge glasses. Is that a valid reason? Phoebe was already taking off her apron. Deduct it from my salary, my holiday, my pension, whatever you want. I have to go. She grabbed her purple backpack left bare 2.0 on the counter. Take care of him, he's sensitive. And went out the front door with the bell ringing like an escaped soundtrack. She caught the first taxi that appeared. Gave the address of McCormick Place. The driver looked at her in the rearview mirror. Chopsticks in her hair, gray sweater, purple backpack. The expression of someone going to save the world or have a nervous breakdown, or possibly both at the same time. In a hurry, lady? I was 20 minutes ago. Now it has upgraded to an emergency. The taxi cut through Chicago as if the entire city had been warned to get out of the way. Phoebe arrived at McCormick Place in 19 minutes. Paid the driver, ran through the lobby, ran up the stairs because the elevator would take too long, and burst through the backstage doors with the subtlety of a gray sweater wrecking ball. Julian was there. Victoria, Leo, Marcus, 4 engineers with deep dark circles. And on the stage, visible through the side curtains, the robot was still flashing error with its blue eyes, in a repetition that had already become a joke on Chicago's social networks. Julian saw Phoebe, and did something he would never do in normal circumstances. Reached into his leather bag and pulled out Barnaby, the beige teddy bear, the ear sewn with blue thread, the plaid bow tie, clean and adjusted, as if it had been cared for daily by someone who would never admit to caring for a teddy bear. He extended Barnaby in Phoebe's direction without saying anything. Phoebe took the bear, looked at Barnaby, looked at Julian, looked at the flawless bow tie. You washed his tie? She said, low. By hand, with mild soap. Julian made a half-second pause. Don't ask why. Phoebe hugged Barnaby, took a deep breath, and turned to Leo. Show me the code. 4 minutes of diagnostic. Phoebe read the changes Elliot's team had made, and felt the same cold anger Julian must feel every time he looked at the investor who stole his father's company. They ripped out the whole cascade, she said. Replaced it with linear processing that doesn't understand emotional context. It's like replacing a conductor with a metronome and expecting the orchestra to play by itself. Can you restore it? Victoria asked. I need access to the main server. 15 minutes and absolute silence. Leo gave her access. Marcus ensured the silence. Victoria stationed herself at the backstage door like a guard in a red suit. Phoebe sat on the floor, because she always solved things on the floor, opened her laptop, placed Barnaby in her lap, and started typing. And she felt the weight arrive. The fog, the fatigue, the gravity in her eyelids, the system wanting to restart. She stopped typing. Looked at Barnaby, looked at the code on the screen, looked at Julian, who was standing 10 feet away with his hands in his pockets and the strand of hair fallen on his forehead, and said to herself, No, I'm going to be here for this. With open eyes. Not this time. Phoebe took a deep breath, squeezed her eyes shut, shook her head, and went back to typing, line by line, restoring the asynchronous neural cascade, rebuilding the emotional loop, reconnecting every processing point Elliot's team had amputated. 12 minutes later, she raised her head. Done. Restart the system. Leo restarted it. The robot's eyes went out, lit up. Clean blue, no error. Now, Phoebe said, I need to go out there. Out where? Marcus asked. On stage. Julian looked at her. Are you sure? 400 journalists just saw EchoSense crash live. If we don't show that it works now, there's no press release in the next 24 hours that will save the company's reputation. And that's your father's company. I promised I'd get it back. Julian didn't answer with words, just nodded. Phoebe walked onto the stage, with Barnaby under her arm, crooked chopsticks, sweater with the same ink stain from the interview, red Converse sneakers, 400 people looking, 12 cameras. Stage lights that turned nervous sweat into cinematic glow. She stopped in front of the microphone. Good afternoon. My name is Phoebe Bennett. I'm the lead developer of EchoSense. I know what you saw an hour ago looked like a technical failure. It wasn't. EchoSense's original code was changed without authorization from the engineering team. The version you saw crash wasn't EchoSense. It was a mutilated copy. She turned to the robot. But this is the real version. She asked the first question. EchoSense, how would you describe the emotional state of this room right now? The robot processed. The blue eyes glowed and replied, I detect high skepticism, residual frustration, but also curiosity, and something I would classify as cautious hope. The people in this room want to believe. They just need a reason. Murmurs, exchanged looks. A journalist in the second row lowered his notepad. Phoebe asked the second question. How would you respond to someone who is feeling lonely? The robot paused. Not an error pause, a pause that seemed deliberate. Human. I would say that loneliness isn't the absence of people around. It's the feeling that no one is really paying attention, and that the simplest and hardest thing someone can do for another person is to stop, look them in the eyes and say, I'm here. The silence that followed was of another kind. It wasn't skepticism. It was impact. Phoebe looked at the robot and smiled. One last question. Are you tired? The robot tilted its head. The blue eyes blinked. You look tired, it said. It's okay to rest. The audience exploded, applause that started in the back and rolled like a wave to the first row. Journalists clapping, investors standing, 12 cameras capturing the moment that was going to appear on every news channel in Chicago that night. Phoebe stood on stage with Barnaby under her arm and wet eyes, not from sadness, from something she didn't have a good enough name to describe. She turned to the backstage. Julian was standing at the edge of the side curtain. Phoebe extended her hand. Julian walked onto the stage, in front of 400 people, took her hand, and stayed. Victoria backstage opened a second yellow folder, the originals she had kept, because Victoria Sterling hadn't survived 8 years at Meridian without keeping backups of everything. The ones she had given Phoebe were duplicates. The original documents, with signatures and letterheads, never left her safe. She handed it to the Meridian legal counsel she had summoned 3 hours ago. All the documents are here. Every defrauded contract, every irregular clause, including the Nexus memorandum with Phoebe listed as Resource HR 001. The counsel looked at the folder. Then at Victoria. This is sufficient to invalidate the original share acquisition contract. Victoria adjusted her gold clip. I know. That's why I collected them for 2 years. In the audience, an assistant from Nexus Corp stood up, made a short call, and left the auditorium. Nexus had just canceled its interest in the acquisition. Elliot Drake, who was watching from a monitor in the parking lot of McCormick Place, turned off the screen. On stage, Julian held Phoebe's hand. 400 people standing. The robot with the blue eyes glowing with programmed empathy that, for some reason, seemed more human than half the executives in that room. It happened again, Phoebe whispered. Julian looked at her. And it was perfect. Backstage, after the stage lights went out and the journalists finally stopped shouting questions, Julian and Phoebe were left alone in a hallway with no cameras, no audience, no one watching. Julian didn't say anything, just took a step forward and wrapped Phoebe in a hug, without words, without explanation. Without a pocket ruler to measure the correct distance between two people who had spent weeks pretending the distance didn't hurt. Phoebe closed her eyes. Barnaby was squeezed between the two of them, his plaid bow tie pressed against the navy blue blazer. Julian? Yes. I stayed awake. I know. The system didn't restart. I saw. I think maybe I'm fixed. Julian tightened the hug. You were never broken. The video reached 47 million views in 72 hours. Not the video of the entire press conference, not the technical speech, not Victoria's exposure. The moment when the robot looked at Phoebe and said, "You look tired. It's okay to rest." 47 million people watched a machine tell a girl in a gray sweater and a teddy bear that she could rest. And 47 million people felt something they didn't know how to name, but which made them share the video with someone who also looked tired. The headlines were immediate. Girl who slept in meetings saves billion-dollar company live. EchoSense, the artificial intelligence that understands emotions better than your boss. Meridian CEO holds developer's hand on stage, and the internet can't take it. Phoebe read the headlines on her cell phone, lying on the sofa of her tiny apartment, with Barnaby on her chest and a cup of cold coffee on the side table. "Barnaby," she said, "I'm viral. A girl who slept in meetings is now viral. The internet is a fascinating and slightly disturbing place." 3 weeks later, things settled down. Meridian's legal counsel, carrying Victoria's yellow folder, filed a lawsuit to invalidate the original contract for the acquisition of the majority shares. The evidence was irrefutable. Every document, every manipulated clause, every record of undue pressure on Julian's mother during her period of grief. Elliot Drake didn't fight. Not because he was a man of honor, because he was a man of numbers. And the numbers said that fighting would cost more than losing. He sold his shares back to Julian Vance at fair market value, signed the transfer at a law firm in downtown Chicago with the expression of someone swallowing a whole lemon and trying to smile at the same time. Julian Vance, at 32 years old, recovered the company his father had founded, and the first thing he did after signing the papers was align the 4 black pens on his new desk. Measure with his pocket ruler. An inch. Then he put the ruler in the drawer, and didn't take it out again. The promotion meeting took place on a sunny Tuesday in Sector 7. Julian, Victoria, Marcus, Leo, and the senior engineers were sitting around the oval table. Phoebe entered with Barnaby in her backpack, her spiral notebook under her arm, and chopsticks in her hair. Julian stood up. "Phoebe Bennett, in recognition of your exceptional contribution to the development of EchoSense, the restoration of the system during the National Press Conference, and the fact that you're the only person in this company who can make an artificial intelligence robot say something that makes 47 million people cry. The board has approved your promotion to the position of Director of Empathetic Intelligence at Meridian Technologies." Applause. Leo tapped his pencil on the desk like a drumstick. Marcus noted it on the tablet with what could be a smile. The engineers clapped with the repressed enthusiasm of those who can finally demonstrate respect without appearing sentimental. Phoebe looked at Julian, looked at Victoria, looked at the oval table where everything had started, and said, "No." The silence that fell was the most confused Sector 7 had ever experienced. "No?" Julian repeated. "I don't want to be a director at Meridian. I want to found my own company." The eyebrows of 7 engineers went up in synchronization. Marcus stopped writing for the second time in his career. Leo almost swallowed his pencil. "EchoSense needs room to grow," Phoebe said, and her voice was steady in a way she didn't recognize herself. "In here at Meridian, it's always going to be a department, a project with a budget, with metrics, with people looking at charts. But EchoSense isn't a department. It's an idea, and ideas need freedom to turn into something we can't even imagine yet." She opened her notebook, showed a page with diagrams, projections, and the name written in large letters, EchoSense Labs. An independent company, a spin-off of Meridian, focused exclusively on applied empathetic intelligence. Hospitals, schools, mental health centers, customer service, any place where a machine that truly listens can change someone's life. Julian looked at the diagram, at the projections, at the name. Who would the team be? Phoebe looked at Victoria. "I know how to be the armor," Victoria said, uncrossing her legs with deliberate slowness. "And you know how to be the heart. Together we're unbeatable. I'm in." Phoebe looked at Leo. Leo took the pencil from behind his ear and spun it between his fingers. "CTO?" he said. Phoebe confirmed. "When do we start?" Phoebe turned to Julian. "And I need an investor. Someone who believes in empathetic intelligence. Someone who knows that the future of technology isn't to replace humans, it's to understand them." Julian looked at her for a long moment. The strand of hair fell on his forehead. He didn't adjust it. "How much do you need?" "Enough for an office, 3 servers, and a coffee machine that doesn't make an ambulance noise." Julian laughed. A real laugh, in front of everyone. And this time he didn't call it an involuntary reflex of the facial musculature. Deal. EchoSense Labs opened its doors 6 weeks later in an office on the 12th floor of a building in River North Chicago, with a view of the river and a sign on the door that read, EchoSense Labs, Intelligence that Listens. And underneath, on a smaller sign Phoebe had ordered, Airplane Mode Activated, Back Soon. Victoria organized the office with the efficiency of someone who builds empires before breakfast. Leo set up the technical infrastructure with the pencil behind his ear and a permanent smile. And Phoebe brought Barnaby, her notebook, and an energy that made the entire office vibrate as if charged with positive static electricity. On the afternoon of the first day of operation, Julian appeared. Navy blue suit, brown leather Oxfords, strand of hair on his forehead. He walked over to Phoebe's desk, which was already covered in post-its, papers, 3 pens of different colors, a unicorn ruler, and a Barnaby sitting against the monitor as if he were the real CEO of the place. Julian looked at the desk, looked at the chaos, and couldn't resist, picked up Phoebe's pens and unicorn ruler, aligned the pens and measured. Phoebe watched with a smile, waited for him to finish, and disaligned the 3 pens with a casual flick of her index finger. Julian looked at her, picked up the pens, realigned, measured. Phoebe disaligned them again. Julian realigned them. Phoebe took her unicorn ruler. Julian stood there, empty-handed, looking at the disaligned pens, and the girl with chopsticks in her hair who had just taken away his most important tool, and laughed. A complete laugh, without apologies, without muscular justifications, without any attempt at control. The kind of laugh that happens when someone finally accepts that chaos isn't the enemy, it's the complement. Phoebe returned the unicorn ruler. "You can keep it, but you won't need it as much as you think." Julian put the unicorn ruler in his pocket, looked at Phoebe, at Barnaby, at the new office that smelled of fresh paint and possibility. "Can I stay for a bit?" "You can stay as long as you want." He sat on the corner sofa. Phoebe sat next to him. Barnaby was between the two of them, his plaid bow tie slightly crooked, as always. Chicago shined through the window. The river reflected the afternoon sun like a ribbon of liquid silver. "Julian's. I'm gonna sleep. It could be now. It could be 10 minutes from now. It could be in the middle of a sentence." "That's fine. Will you stay?" Julian didn't answer immediately. He adjusted Barnaby between them with the care of someone placing the last piece of a puzzle that took a lifetime to assemble. "Always," he said. Phoebe leaned her head on his shoulder, closed her eyes, and for the first time, not because the system forced it, not because her brain blacked out, not because the impossible gravity pulled her eyelids down without permission, because she wanted to. Because there, on that sofa, with that teddy bear and that man who aligned pens his whole life so he wouldn't fall apart, she could finally rest without fear. The spiral notebook was open on the desk. On the last page, with the shaky handwriting of someone who wrote laughing, Survival Manual, How to Deal with Robotic Geniuses. Entry number 47. Sometimes the smartest thing a genius can do is keep a teddy bear in their leather bag and wait. And on the last line, in larger letters, it happened again, and this time it was on purpose. Through the window, the lights of Chicago shine like stars scattered over the city. And for the first time, Phoebe didn't feel she needed to fix who she was to deserve happiness. Sometimes the things we try to hide are exactly the ones that make us unforgettable. Phoebe Bennett taught us that our flaws are not always obstacles, that the right people see value where the world sees imperfections, and that courage isn't being perfect, but continuing to move forward, even when you don't fit into other people's standards. If you've ever gone through something similar, remember, what today seems like your greatest weakness may be precisely the characteristic that will make your story special. And now we want to know your opinion. What rating from 0 to 10 do you give this story? If this story touched your heart, leave your like and use the hype button to help more people discover this romantic comedy full of humor, emotion, and second chances. Tell us in the comments, what was the most memorable moment of Phoebe and Julian's journey? The end.